Why would a billionaire secretly follow his old black maid, and what he saw shocked him forever? Clara Johnson wiped the last smudge of dust from the marble counter, her hands aching but her pride intact. She had spent decades serving in Richard Kingsley's grand mansion, unseen, unheard, yet she worked with unwavering dedication. Today was no different, yet a subtle unease tickled at the back of her mind. She noticed the glances from Emily Roberts, who always lingered a moment too long, eyes filled with a mix of guilt and worry. Richard Kingsley watched from the study doorway, a figure of wealth and authority, his sharp eyes noticing everything yet revealing nothing. Clara carried herself with quiet dignity, unaware that Richard had silently decided to follow her after work, curiosity mixed with something deeper stirring inside him. Outside the mansion, Clara walked briskly through the dim streets, the city lights casting long shadows on her path. She paused by the corner, counting the small coins she had earned this week, thinking of bills, rent, and the endless sacrifices she had made. Meanwhile, Richard trailed discreetly, hidden by distance, heart unexpectedly heavy at the sight of her humble journey home. Every step Clara took, every small struggle she bore alone, pierced a part of him he hadn't felt in years, a pang of guilt and sorrow he couldn't ignore. He watched as she bought a small loaf of bread with her hard-earned money, interacting with shopkeepers politely yet humbly, bowing her head in quiet respect. Richard's mind raced with memories of his own privilege, the ease of life he had always taken for granted, and the weight Clara bore silently every day. He realized he had never truly seen her, never truly understood her world beyond the polished floors of his mansion. The streets were rough, uneven, reflecting the harsh reality Clara had navigated her entire life with grace. By the time Clara reached her modest apartment, exhausted yet composed, Richard knew he had witnessed something profoundly human, a story of resilience, dignity, and quiet strength that no amount of wealth could ever buy. He felt a lump in his throat, emotions unfamiliar and raw, as he silently vowed to change how he saw her and the countless others who lived unnoticed. He stepped back into the shadows, heart heavy, yet determined to act in a way that could make a difference. Clara never noticed the man in the distance, yet unknowingly, she had shifted the life of a billionaire simply by living with honesty and integrity. The night air was cool, the city alive with distant sounds, but for Richard, every moment had shifted, a realization dawning that life's truest lessons were often hidden in plain sight. Comment your thoughts and subscribe to see what happens next in Clara's journey. Clara Johnson woke the next morning before sunrise, the soft glow of the streetlights fading as she prepared for another long day at the mansion, her mind already racing through the endless list of chores, cleaning schedules, and meals to prepare. She moved with quiet efficiency, her hands steady despite the aching from yesterday's work, each movement a testament to decades of labor and resilience. Emily Roberts arrived soon after, offering a polite smile, a small gesture of kindness that Clara appreciated but did not rely upon, knowing the world was harsher than any fleeting niceties. Richard Kingsley observed from his study window, sipping his morning coffee, unable to shake the vision of Clara walking through the streets last night, carrying herself with dignity despite the exhaustion etched in her face. He had followed her discreetly, yet every step she took revealed a story he had never bothered to notice, a silent narrative of sacrifice, struggle, and strength. The guilt weighed heavily on him as he realized how many people like Clara had been invisible to him, servants of wealth yet unseen and undervalued. Today, the mansion felt different. Richard decided to take an unannounced walk through the staff quarters, his usual arrogance tempered by curiosity and a strange, unsettling empathy he could not deny. Clara was organizing the kitchen supplies, humming softly, unaware of the billionaire's presence nearby. Her focus was absolute, each movement precise, and yet there was an elegance even in her laborious tasks that made Richard pause, his mind reconsidering every previous assumption he had ever made about people in her position. Emily noticed his presence, a flicker of surprise crossing her features, and yet she said nothing, knowing the tension in the air was thick and fragile. Guests began arriving for the day's events, their faces reflecting society's judgment, some dismissive, others curious, but none truly seeing Clara as she was, a woman carrying immense dignity alongside her burden. Richard cleared his throat, finally drawing her attention. Clara looked up, startled for a brief moment, before quickly bowing her head slightly in respect. He hesitated, searching for words that could adequately convey the mix of apology, awe, and sincerity he felt. "Clara," he began, voice softer than usual, I saw you last night." Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of suspicion mixed with caution, yet she remained composed. "I mean to understand more about your life, about your struggles. I realize I have ignored them for far too long." Clara remained silent, her expression unreadable, yet there was a subtle shift in her posture, a faint acknowledgement that he was speaking truthfully. Emily glanced between them, nervous but quietly hopeful, sensing a rare moment of genuine connection forming. The day unfolded with Clara performing her duties, but now under the watchful yet respectful gaze of Richard. He asked small, thoughtful questions, showing interest without overstepping, letting her dignity remain intact. Every interaction, every polite exchange, began to chip away at the walls of assumption and prejudice he had unconsciously carried for decades. Richard's staff noticed the change. Some were confused, some impressed, others skeptical. Clara continued to work with her usual calm efficiency, yet inside a small seed of hope had been planted, the idea that perhaps her life, her worth, and her struggles could be seen beyond the walls of the mansion and the color of her skin. By evening, Richard retired to his study, heart heavy yet inspired, knowing the journey toward understanding and respect had only begun. Comment your thoughts and subscribe to see how Clara's life unfolds as Richard begins to confront his own biases and the invisible world of those he once ignored. Clara Johnson entered the mansion early, before the sun had fully risen, the first rays of daylight spilling across the city streets, casting long shadows that mirrored the weight she carried in her heart. The previous day had left her unsettled, yet quietly hopeful. Richard Kingsley's unexpected acknowledgement of her life and struggles lingered in her mind like a fragile flame in the dark. She moved through the familiar corridors with practiced grace, each step deliberate, each task performed with the efficiency of years of unrecognized labor. Yet today there was a subtle confidence in her posture, a quiet strength that had grown in her after the unexpected humanizing of her employer. Emily Roberts followed shortly, carrying a tray of freshly brewed coffee, nervous yet emboldened by the change she had seen in Richard. "Good morning, Clara," Emily whispered softly, careful not to startle her. He seems different today." Clara offered a small nod, acknowledging the comment but keeping her focus. Trust was not given lightly, especially in a world where judgment and prejudice often overshadowed kindness. Richard Kingsley, now aware of the depth of Clara's daily burdens, moved through the mansion with a purpose unfamiliar to him. His usual air of detached superiority was replaced with cautious curiosity as he observed the subtle grace with which Clara managed her duties, the quiet dignity that no amount of wealth or status could overshadow. The staff, accustomed to the billionaire's rigid demeanor, noticed the shift immediately. Whispers spread among them, some incredulous, some quietly approving, while a few maintained their usual judgmental glances. Guests began arriving for the day's luncheon, their luxury cars glinting in the morning light, their expressions a mixture of entitlement, curiosity, and silent evaluation. Yet Richard's attention was not on the guests or their status, but entirely on Clara, realizing for the first time the humanity and struggles of someone society often overlooked. He approached her quietly, clearing his throat with a mix of hesitation and sincerity. "Clara," he began, voice steady yet unusually soft, "I have watched, and I have realized how little I understood about the life you lead. Your work, your strength, it is remarkable, and I owe you respect." Clara paused mid-task, the words sinking in, her expression a careful balance of caution and curiosity. She had encountered insincere praise before, but something about the tone, the hesitation, and the weight behind the words convinced her that Richard's acknowledgement was real. Emily watched, heart pounding, sensing a rare moment where true recognition of a person's worth unfolded before her eyes. The luncheon proceeded, and Clara moved with her usual efficiency, serving the guests with elegance and calm composure, yet now there was a subtle air of empowerment around her. Richard observed closely, noticing how she interacted with the guests, how her kindness and professionalism stood in stark contrast to the judgment and condescension of those around her. A wealthy guest commented dismissively on a minor mishap, and Clara responded with grace, her composure unwavering, earning quiet admiration from those paying attention. Emily glanced at Richard, who simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement that he had witnessed not just her work, but her character. Every small exchange became a lesson in humanity, empathy, and the quiet power of dignity. By evening, the mansion felt transformed, not by wealth or status, but by the recognition of a life often ignored. Clara returned to the kitchen, exhausted yet quietly triumphant, aware that her presence, her strength, and her unseen struggles were finally seen and valued by someone of influence. Richard retreated to his study, reflecting on the realization that true power was not in wealth or authority, but in understanding, empathy, and the courage to confront his own biases. He made a silent promise to himself to not only see Clara for who she was, but to advocate for those whose voices had long been silenced. Comment your thoughts and subscribe to witness Clara's journey as the billionaire begins to change, and the hidden stories of the invisible servants are finally recognized and respected. Clara Johnson woke before dawn, the first rays of sunlight barely touching the London skyline, a city that often overlooked those who worked silently behind the scenes. Today felt different. There was a weight in the air, a mixture of anticipation and unspoken tension, as if the world had shifted slightly in her favor. The previous days had revealed glimmers of respect and acknowledgement from Richard Kingsley, the billionaire she had served for decades, yet she knew that true change was not given lightly in a world that often judged people by the color of their skin or the position they occupied. She dressed carefully, her hands steady but her heart racing with a cautious hope, knowing that whatever happened today could redefine not only her life, but also the perspectives of those who had long underestimated her. Emily Roberts entered quietly, carrying a tray of fresh tea, her eyes reflecting both admiration and nervousness. "Good morning, Clara," Emily whispered, careful not to startle her. "Today feels different." Clara nodded, a subtle smile crossing her lips, a mixture of gratitude and resolve. Richard Kingsley descended the grand staircase, his usual air of arrogance tempered by the revelations of the last week. He had witnessed Clara's unwavering strength, her quiet dignity, and her capacity to endure injustice without bitterness, and it had unsettled him profoundly. He paused midway, glancing at her as she arranged the dining area with practiced precision, noting the calm determination in her movements, the elegance even in the simplest gestures. "Clara," he said, his voice softer than usual but firm, "today I want to do something different. I want to see things from your eyes." Clara's eyes flickered with surprise, but also cautious optimism. She had heard promises before, but the sincerity in his tone was undeniable. Emily observed silently, sensing a pivotal moment, a rare instance where a man of wealth and power chose to confront his biases rather than hide behind them. The morning unfolded with the usual bustle of staff and guests, yet there was an unmistakable shift in energy. Richard moved among the employees and guests with a newfound attentiveness, subtly instructing his staff to respect Clara's space and her authority in managing the household. The staff, initially skeptical, began to follow his lead, some with confusion, others with quiet approval, and a few who continued their judgmental ways were too intimidated by the change to voice dissent. Guests arrived for the afternoon gathering, their polished faces and expensive attire reflecting society's obsession with status, yet none could ignore the transformation taking place within the walls of the mansion. Clara served each guest with grace, her quiet confidence radiating, commanding respect without demanding it, a subtle but powerful lesson in dignity and resilience. Midday brought a private conversation between Richard and Clara in the library. A room filled with sunlight and the scent of old books, a sanctuary for honesty. Richard spoke openly about his realizations, confessing his past ignorance and the prejudices he had unconsciously held. Clara listened, her expression measured, allowing the sincerity of his words to register. She responded with quiet wisdom, emphasizing that respect must be earned but also recognized, and that true influence lay not in wealth or authority, but in the acknowledgement of the humanity in every person. Emily, observing from the doorway, felt a sense of awe, realizing that she was witnessing not just a personal transformation, but a societal lesson unfolding, where privilege confronted prejudice and empathy replaced indifference. By evening, the mansion's atmosphere had changed entirely. Clara moved through the dining room, serving with her usual poise, while guests whispered among themselves, astonished by the respect she now commanded and the subtle authority she wielded without force. Richard watched closely, proud and reflective, understanding that this was not merely about correcting his own behavior, but about setting an example for the world outside these walls. Emily quietly assisted, her admiration for Clara growing with each passing moment, recognizing that the true power of dignity and patience often outshone wealth and influence. The staff, once judgmental or indifferent, now approached Clara with respect, aware that the dynamics of authority and recognition had irrevocably shifted. As the day drew to a close, Clara returned to the quiet of the kitchen, exhausted yet triumphant, aware that her life, her struggles, and her dignity were finally acknowledged in a way that transcended social hierarchy. Richard retreated to his study, reflecting on the lessons learned, that true wealth lay not in possessions, but in understanding, empathy, and the courage to face one's biases. Emily closed the doors behind him, a silent witness to a profound transformation, knowing she had observed something rare, a moment where justice, respect, and human decency triumphed over prejudice and arrogance. Comment your thoughts and subscribe to witness Clara's journey, a story of resilience, dignity, and the power of being seen. True respect and recognition are not earned through status or wealth, but through the acknowledgement of humanity in every individual, and courage to confront one's biases can change lives.